Hey, good afternoon, y'all. It's John with Empire Weather. Hope you guys are doing well and having a wonderful week so far. I'm starting this video off with some very exciting visuals, which is rain in parts of southern and western Kansas. We haven't seen this in quite some time. And this is just the first round of several rounds of rain expected over the next couple of days. You can see the heaviest rain here this afternoon is sort of angled through southwestern Kansas from about Medicine Lodge up to Ness City or Scott City region. But we're expecting more of that to build into southwestern Kansas with multiple rounds of rain through the next couple of days and down into Oklahoma as well. If we come on down here and move over to northern Oklahoma, we have areas of rain developing in this region as well, expected to continue for the next several hours with multiple rounds through the next couple of days. So obviously for multiple reasons, that is really important. And the main reason is that this area has just been decimated by drought over the last several weeks. This is the 180-day precipitation anomaly, departure from normal. And several of these regions that we just watched have rain falling are in the about 20 to 30% of their normal precipitation in the last 180 days. And some areas have picked up a total of less than 7 or 8/10 of an inch in southwestern Kansas. So needless to say, this is really important rainfall, and it's going to be a huge part of the forecast moving forward over the next several days and weeks. Even if you take this, in a shorter time frame, the last 60 days, it's even wilder and even more impressive. And in the last 30 days, many of these areas have just been extraordinarily dry. So this rain is obviously much needed, and we do expect several rounds of it over the next couple of days. Here's a European model through Tuesday and Wednesday. So here's a current round. We get another heavy round across eastern Colorado into Kansas and Oklahoma on Wednesday morning. That shifts southward, continues into Thursday morning, and then finally wraps up Thursday afternoon. And here's what the precipitation totals are forecast to look like on the European model. Widespread 1 to 2 inches, but if we poke in here and look at parts of Kansas and northern Oklahoma, we see the potential for over 2 inches of precipitation in some areas. Same thing in eastern Colorado as well. And again, this goes back to this pattern over the last 180 days, which has just been exceptionally dry in this general area. So this will obviously be a focus over the next couple of days. We'll have to keep an eye on exactly how it verifies and how this plays out. So that is a huge part of the forecast this week. Backing up, though, and looking at the belt in general, that's the main focus. The rest of the area is a little cooler than normal and has dry sort of west-northwesterly flow over the next couple of days. We'll see a gradual warm-up as we move through the week, and then we get into an unsettled period this weekend. And the models suggest that the trough causing that storm system in southern Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas will move off to the east and eventually interact with another storm. You see that storm drop down here from the northern plains into the central plains, and eventually you get sort of this hodgepodge of storm systems across the Ohio Valley and the upper Midwest, and then a big, deep trough this weekend. And that is going to lead to unsettled weather conditions, multiple rounds of showers, sort of an unsettled weather pattern from Friday into Saturday and Sunday. And then finally, that storm, you see this big cyclonic wrap up here Sunday into Monday. That's going to drag colder air down into the belt. And we'll get into that in a second. But the real question to ask ourselves is, what is causing this? Why are we seeing this big storm? And why have we been stuck in this colder pattern for quite some time? And the answer can be found if we back up and look at what's going on across North America. Right now, as it stands today, you see this big red blob here over eastern Canada into parts of Greenland and the Northwest Atlantic. This is a negative NAO, also known as high latitude blocking. And watch the next couple of days. It just hangs out in parts of central Canada while we get a big ridge out west. You see this big ridge that develops on the west coast? These two blocks, these high latitude blocks, these areas of red, they act to dislodge the air that's typically in the springtime up here and up in Canada and the Arctic regions, and they push it all over the place. But here in the U.S. and parts of southern Canada, they're pushing it southward, and they're allowing these deep storms to form. You see this storm that eventually leads to this big system down here? It starts up here in Canada, and it rides over the top of this big ridge and down because it can't go this way. It can't go east because of this block. It's forced down into the U.S., and eventually it forms into this large storm system. And so what we're saying here is that when we look at this pattern through the next week, It's still unsettled, and it's still likely to lean a little cooler than normal as a result of this blocking that exists in the high latitudes above the United States. So when we go back and look at the temperature forecast now across the belt during the weekend, we have this residual cooler pattern, but that big storm forms, and it's going to tug all this cold down. And you can see temperatures going well below normal from Sunday into Monday and Tuesday across parts of the belt. Now, this air does not look as cold as the system we had last week, but that being said, it's still very possible when you have temperatures that are, 10, 12, 15 degrees below normal, that we're going to look at the possibility of some frost and freeze. If we look at the climatological date of the last 32-degree freeze, and it's right around now in many of the central belt regions from April 21st to April 30th across parts of central Iowa, northern Illinois, northern Indiana, in northern Ohio, but down in central and southern regions, it should have already happened. April 11th to 20th should have been that last 32-degree freeze. So again, we go back to this temperature forecast and we say, what do these temperatures actually look like? So let's look at the forecast low temperatures. Here is Sunday morning's forecast lows. Obviously, it's chilly. We're in the 40s, but nothing really crazy. This is a European ensemble, by the way. And then we look at Monday morning, and it gets a little colder. We're down into the upper 20s in the Dakotas, 30s in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and we even have some 30s creeping in here to parts of Illinois and parts of Indiana and Ohio, as well as Nebraska and the Plains. And we roll that forward to Tuesday morning, we have even more of them. So, we're looking at mid-30s on the ensemble forecast as of right now, which again, backing up, it's right on the periphery of the area that's getting a little late for their late season frost and freeze. We just want to keep an eye on this. Again, this is Sunday through Tuesday of this upcoming weekend. It's associated with this cold that drops in behind this deep storm system. Eventually, we see that cold starting to erode as we move towards the middle part of next week. It starts to move off to the east, and that is the first sign of what we have been talking about for a while now, which is this early May pattern change. And I want to go back to the heights, and I want to look at this and talk about what's happening. And you can really start to see it happen. It's this ridge, ironically enough, that leads to the storm. But this ridge is going to create warmer temperatures in the west by the time we get to May 1st, going to lead to some snow melt in those areas. But this same ridge is going to roll over to the east. Watch it happen here. Here it comes. It's going to roll down to the east and end up in the central plains by the time we get to about the middle to latter part of that first week of May. We also have a lack of high latitude blocking now on the Atlantic side. Remember, we had this big block to start, this big red blob. In about 10 days, that's gone. It's been replaced with some troughing, actually, in the North Atlantic. So the window is going to open for warmth to spread into the central United States. Another thing, as we go through this transition from the La Nina into the El Nino, is monitoring the MJO. And if we look at how that's progressing, we can get some more clues as to how this pattern is going to evolve. So without getting into too much of the technical mumbo-jumbo, what we want to look at here is this is the tropical Pacific here at the bottom of your image. And we're watching the progression in time on the left side here. We're watching the progression in time of convection in green and subsidence or sinking air in brown. And what we see is a passage of the MJO through the tropical Pacific in the past. So it happened in about mid to late April, and now we're in a suppressive phase. But the forecast as we move into the first week of May is for another MJO wave to come out. And it's kind of like wax on, wax off, wax on. The pattern is in ebb and flow. And this next MJO pulse adds some confidence to the fact that as this high latitude blocking dissipates, we're very likely going to see the pattern begin to change. Looking at this from a hemispheric perspective, here's our deep trough as we move into the upcoming weekend. And then all of a sudden next week, we roll that forward. And this pattern is a lot different than the one that we've been dealing with. We have a ridge now in the central U.S. We have a trough lingering in the northeast. I think they'll be probably a little slow to get the big-time warmth going and will remain a little cooler for a while compared to the rest of the country. But for a lot of the belt, this pattern is one that trends a bit warmer. And it also introduces the possibility of this jet stream coming out and providing precipitation to this region. Zooming in on the United States, I want to just talk about the synoptics of this. So this is the first week of May, right? We have been cold for some time prior. Here's our big trough across the belt. It's a drier sort of northwesterly flow, and it's cooler than normal, and we have the possibility of some localized frost Sunday into Tuesday of this upcoming week. But once this trough moves away, the ridging, the oranges, move over the belt, and we have a trough that's sitting off the coast here of California. This trough is not just sitting here doing nothing. The jet associated with it is going to come out from the southwest. We can even look at that here if we want. We can look at the model simulation, the ensemble simulation for the jet. So there it is. Eventually, all that momentum from this jet stream is going to come out into the plains. You could see it sort of trying to do it here, coming out into the plains. But because we have a ridge axis over the plains here, what also happens is we start to get moisture and warmth returning to that central plains region. So your air mass here is going to return out of the Gulf of Mexico at some point, and you're going to have moisture developing throughout the plains while intersecting and becoming juxtaposed with this southwesterly flow from this trough. That's going to lead to the development of some storm systems, and more importantly, shower, thunderstorm, possibly some severe thunderstorm events across the high plains, including probably parts of Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska, maybe even the Dakotas, if we can get moisture up there, and down into western Kansas as well. This region is heavily favored in these kinds of patterns to get precipitation. Now, the model itself, so far, we're not seeing a huge signal yet. You just see it start to show up here at the end of the forecast. This is your dry west flow behind the cold this weekend, but it just starts to change as we get into this time frame. And if we look at this in 72-hour increments, we can get a much better idea, right? So let's track this. Here's our weekend storm. We have this cold northwesterly flow behind it, right? You could see the arc of drier, cooler air. But let's roll this forward now as we get into that first week of May, and all of a sudden we're lighting up the high plains. Look at this precipitation signal here across this region. This is not just a coincidence. It's because of this change we're seeing. We have the MJO progressing, and we have a much different pattern in place here where we have ridging across this region and a jet stream coming out from the southwest U.S. We also have the help of the subtropical jet, which will help provide precipitation in these areas, moisture in these areas for precipitation during this first week of May. So the current thought is that as we head into this first week of May, we are going to see warmth really start to increase across the belt, specifically late in that week, probably from the 4th of May onward into that weekend. Figure May 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. And probably continuing beyond that into about the middle part of May. There's no reason to believe that this pattern will change. In fact, this troughing in the northeast will likely begin to lift away as this sort of west-southwesterly flow continues. And that's the driving factor behind this forecast. We know that we have the MJO coming back here. It's already started. It's going to propagate across the Central Pacific, and it's going to help add confidence in the fact that this southwesterly jet will be back and will provide moisture to not only the Central Plains, but eventually the Midwest as well as warming temperatures as we move into the middle part of May. So we have a lot to unpack, and I stressed this in a couple of our calls and our presentation on our Twitter space earlier this morning. There's a great deal of uncertainty as we move beyond mid to late May in regards to how this El Nino is going to play out. This is sort of uncharted territory in regards to coming out of a third-year La Nina into what we consider to be a quickly developing El Nino. So while we're fairly confident here into mid and late May, beyond that, the forecast becomes very complex and very uncertain. And there's one thing that this tells us here is that we're going to see a lot of back and forth and roller coaster type nature to this pattern. But until then, we get through this cold this weekend. We talked about it. We have this big storm developing, and there are cooler temperatures. We have one last frost risk coming this weekend and early next week. And then we get our high plains warm up and a pattern that should be conducive to not only warmth, but then the development of precipitation as well into the central part of the United States, including areas that really need it in the high plains. So stay tuned. We have a lot more coming your way over the next couple of days. We'll have all of our morning briefings out as usual tomorrow on Wednesday morning. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate. Shoot us an email, team@empireweather.com. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Take care.